Imagine a world where every flicker of doubt, every shadow of sorrow, simply fades. Not through choice, not through therapy, but through something else. Something unseen, yet profoundly felt. You wake up one morning, and that gnawing anxiety about the future, gone. The ache of a past regret, erased. It feels like peace, right? A perfect, serene existence. But what if that peace isn't truly yours? What if it's been given to you? Slowly, insidiously. What if the very definition of who you are, the intricate dance of joy and pain that makes you, well, you, is being meticulously rewritten, line by delicate neural line? This isn't just about control. It's about the quiet dismantling of consciousness itself, a process so subtle you might not even feel the first tremor. Until it's too late. Until the brain you call your own is no longer yours to explain. The soft hum of the archival servers was the most consistent sound in Alara Vance's world. It was a soothing, almost maternal drone, a constant reminder of the meticulously organized information she was tasked to safeguard. Dust motes, caught in the precisely calibrated beams of morning light, filtering through the high windows of the Concord archives, danced like miniature stars in a silent cosmic ballet. Alara traced a line of code on her datapad, her finger leaving a faint, momentary smudge on the cool glass. Her cubicle, like every other, was a study in minimalist function, a ergonomic chair, a wall-mounted console, a personal replicator spitting out nutrient paste at designated intervals. Everything was clean, logical, and utterly devoid of personal touch. No worn photographs, no quirky trinkets. Just the quiet devotion to data. Today, however, the familiar hum felt different. It was still soothing, but a faint dissonance seemed to vibrate beneath the surface. A tremor Alara couldn't quite identify. She had spent the last 2 cycles meticulously cross-referencing agricultural output records from the North American quadrant, a task that typically induced a serene, almost meditative state. But something had shifted. A particular data set, outlining crop yields from 2 decades prior, flagged a discrepancy that, on its own, was negligible. A 2% variance in wheat production between sector Gamma 7 and Delta 4, statistically insignificant, easily attributable to minor climate fluctuations. Yet, Alara's internal logic system, finely honed by years of pattern recognition, tugged at her. It wasn't the data itself that was wrong. It was the explanation provided in the supplemental notes. Localized atmospheric stabilization protocols implemented with optimal efficacy, the note read. But the yield reduction suggested less than optimal efficacy. The words felt hollow, a prefabricated narrative that didn't quite align with the raw numbers. She clicked through several related files. Every discrepancy, no matter how small, was consistently followed by similar bland, reassuring explanations. Explanations that, upon closer inspection, didn't actually explain anything. They simply stated a positive outcome, even when the data hinted otherwise. A tightness, subtle and unsettling, began to bloom in her chest. It wasn't anxiety in the way the old stories described it. A gut-wrenching dread, or a racing pulse. It was quieter, a persistent pressure behind her sternum, like a breath held just a fraction too long. Across the aisle, Archivist Unit 734, known colloquially as Bryn, stirred from her focused trance. Bryn, a woman with perfectly smooth, dark hair and eyes that rarely seemed to blink, pushed a stray strand behind her ear with a methodical grace. "Optimal efficiency achieved, Ilara," she murmured, her voice soft and even, almost synthesized. "My current projection indicates a 73% completion rate for the day's tasks, precisely aligned with our current cycle's individual productivity quota." Ilara glanced at Bryn. There was no warmth in her tone, no genuine curiosity, just a statement of fact, a recitation of protocol. Bryn's face, unlined and placid, mirrored the faces of everyone Ilara encountered in the concourse. A subtle, almost imperceptible sheen of contentment seemed to cling to them all, like the pollen on a spring flower. It was the hallmark of cognitive harmonization, the pervasive, unseen force that ensured societal serenity. No anger, no sorrow, no doubt. Just a smooth, unruffled calm. For years, Ilara had accepted it, embraced it even. The absence of the sharp, ugly edges of despair or rage was a blessing, a universal balm applied to every consciousness. She'd heard the ancient histories of the old world, full of bewildering emotional volatility, wars born of irrational hatreds, and individual lives crushed by despair. The Concord had banished all that. And yet, Bryn's eyes, devoid of any flicker of genuine emotion, struck Ilara anew. There was an emptiness there, a hollowness behind the placid surface that she hadn't truly noticed until now. Had her own eyes always looked like that to others? The thought sent a shiver, light as a feather, down her spine. It was the first tremor of something truly unsettling. At the designated lunchtime interval, Ilara made her way to the communal refectory. The scent of processed grain protein, vaguely savory, filled the air. She selected her portion from the dispenser, the usual lukewarm gray paste, and found an empty seat at a polished chrome table. Beside her, a technician from the Atmospheric Regulation Department smiled a polite, vacant smile. "Excellent day, isn't it?" the technician offered, his voice lacking inflection. "Optimal atmospheric pressure maintained throughout Sector 9. Ilara nodded, pushing the bland paste around her bowl with a spoon. "Indeed," she replied, her own voice betraying no hint of the churning questions inside her. She remembered fleetingly a sensation from her childhood, a moment when a friend had laughed so hard milk had come out of their nose. The memory was faint, almost certainly a manufactured illusion, as spontaneous laughter was rare, and milk was not a common beverage. But the feeling associated with that memory, a burst of unadulterated, slightly messy joy, was something she rarely, if ever, witnessed now. It was then she decided to risk it. The quiet unease had solidified into a firm resolve. She needed to find someone who might understand. Later that afternoon, under the guise of cross-referencing archaic public utility schematics, Ilara accessed the restricted historical databases. Her access codes, granted due to her archival clearance, were extensive, but she knew the system logged every query. She searched for anomalies not in data, but in personnel records, specifically for individuals flagged with cognitive dissonance prior to the widespread implementation of harmonization protocols. The results were, predictably, scant. Most records had been purged or revised, but a few names, protected by layers of bureaucratic oversight, remained. One name surfaced multiple times: Jax Kale, labeled reformer, dissident, advocate for emotional liberty. His public file was a redacted wasteland, but the fact that it still existed, however obscurely, spoke volumes. It meant he wasn't fully erased. It meant he existed Outside the pristine narrative, Elara cross-referenced his last known public interface terminal, a small overlooked data kiosk on the fringe of the industrial district, usually frequented by manual labor units seeking hourly reassignments. It was a long shot, a needle in a haystack of enforced conformity. She waited until her shift ended, then bypassed the standard transport routes. Instead of taking the direct maglev home to her identical apartment unit in Sector 3, she opted for the older, less efficient ground conduits, weaving through narrow pedestrian lanes rarely monitored by public censor. The air in the industrial district carried a faint metallic tang, a stark contrast to the sterile freshness of the central city. The buildings were older, their facades slightly grimy, not polished to the Concorde's typical sheen. She found the kiosk tucked away in an alcove, its screen flickering erratically. A figure stood hunched over it, their back to her. The broad shoulders, the slight slump, the way they ran a hand through a shock of dark, unkempt hair. It matched the faded profile image she had seen in the restricted files. "Excuse me," Elara said, her voice a little breathier than usual. Her heart, a quiet drumbeat just moments before, now throbbed with a low, insistent rhythm. The figure turned slowly. Jax Cale. His face was a landscape etched with lines that spoke of experience, of emotions long felt and perhaps never truly harmonized away. His eyes, a startling shade of hazel, held a glint of something Elara recognized. Not anger, but a profound weariness, coupled with an almost imperceptible spark of defiance. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't placid. He simply looked at her. Lost. He grunted, his voice a low rasp, not the smooth, modulated tone common in the Concorde. He held a crumpled paper cup, steam curling faintly from its rim, an anachronism in this world of dispensed nutrients. The faint aroma of something rich, almost bitter, reached Elara. Real coffee, perhaps. "No," Elara replied, her voice steadying. I was looking for information." Jax's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but a knowing acknowledgement. "Information is a tricky business in these parts," he said, taking a slow sip from his cup. "Especially when the official channels are designed to provide the right kind of information, and nothing else." He scrutinized her for a moment, his gaze sharp, assessing. Elara felt exposed, yet oddly invigorated. This wasn't the placid, agreeable interaction of her daily life. This was raw. "I found inconsistencies," Elara confessed, the words tumbling out faster than she intended. "In the archives, data that doesn't quite match the official narratives. Explanations that don't explain." Jax let out a soft, humorless chuckle. "You're an archivist, then?" he asked. Elara nodded. "A rare breed, still capable of seeing the threads that don't quite weave into the Concorde's perfect tapestry." He paused, looking past her, his gaze distant, as if observing a phantom crowd. "What you're seeing, Elara," he continued, his voice dropping slightly, "are the seams, the places where they've patched over the truth." He took another slow sip of his coffee. "They're not just harmonizing our emotions, you know. They're harmonizing reality, rewriting our memories, our histories, the very fabric of what we understand to be true." The words hit Elara like a physical blow, a cold dread washing over her. Her chest tightened, a genuine, undeniable sensation this time, not merely a phantom pressure. The peace, the quiet serenity of the Concorde suddenly felt like a heavy shroud, stifling and suffocating. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jax looked at her, his hazel eyes holding that deep, weary knowledge. To control us, he stated plainly, without drama. Not just our actions, Ilara, but our very minds. Our ability to question, to doubt, to feel something other than what they allow. It's a dismantling of consciousness itself, piece by agonizing piece. He gestured vaguely back towards the glowing, pristine city. The peace they've given us, it's not yours. It's theirs. The weight of his words settled upon Ilara, heavier than any physical burden. The world she thought she knew, the serene, orderly existence, dissolved around her. The hum of the archival servers no longer sounded soothing. It was the thrum of a vast, insidious machine. "What can we do?" she asked, the question escaping her lips almost involuntarily, a desperate plea in the growing twilight. Jax finished his coffee, crumpled the cup, and tossed it into a recycling chute with a practiced, almost violent flick of his wrist. "That," he said, turning fully towards her, a new glint in his eyes that was not defiance but a grim determination, "is where your journey truly begins." He offered her no further explanation, no immediate plan, just a profound, unsettling truth. Ilara stood there, the cool, metallic smell of the industrial district filling her lungs, a nascent fear mixing with a strange, undeniable spark of urgency. The quiet unease had found its voice, and it was screaming. The recycled air in the sub-level utility shaft smelled of old metal and the faint, sweet decay of forgotten insulation. Ilara shivered, not from the cold, but from the raw digital hum that vibrated through the floor plates beneath her worn boot. Jax crouched beside her, his fingers a blur across a modified data slate, barely seemed to notice the chill or the grime. His breath plumed in the dim light cast by his screen, a momentary cloud in the stagnant gloom. "Almost there," he murmured, his voice a low rumble, entirely devoid of the nervous edge that had started to fray at Ilara's composure. She ran a gloved hand along the rough concrete wall, feeling the tremor of distant machinery. They were deep within the Concorde's digital nervous system, a place officially inaccessible, unofficially a treasure trove of forbidden truths. Her heart thumped an erratic rhythm against her ribs. It had been Jax's relentless prodding, his whispered accusations of a manufactured peace, that had finally pushed her to this point. A small, persistent doubt had gnawed at her, a pebble in the smooth current of everyday contentment. Now, that pebble felt like a jagged rock. A soft chime from Jax's slate broke the silence. He leaned back on his heels, a slow grin spreading across his face, illuminated by the glowing data. Bingo! The screen flickered, then resolved into a cascade of encrypted files, their designations unreadable at first glance. Ilara leaned closer, her breath catching in her throat. The air seemed to thicken, pressing down on her. "What is it?" she asked, her voice a reedy whisper. Jax pointed with a gloved finger. "These aren't typical maintenance logs. Too many redundancies, too many layers of encryption for something so benign sounding." Hay scrolled through, the data flowing like a liquid river. "Project Purity," he read aloud, a note of grim satisfaction in his tone. "It's even more audacious than I imagined." Ilara's brow furrowed. Project Purity. The name alone evoked images of pristine lakes and untouched forests, a world unsullied. It was a term often used in Concorde's official literature, referring vaguely to community wellness initiatives. She'd always accepted it, just another comforting slogan in a world full of them. But now, under the cold blue light of Jax's screen, it felt like a mocking whisper. "What kind of purity?" she asked, a knot tightening in her stomach. Jax's grin vanished, replaced by a focused intensity. He tapped a series of commands, bypassing a final, stubborn firewall. The files bloomed open, revealing detailed schematics, biochemical equations, and neural networked diagrams. Elara felt a sudden lurch, a phantom drop in her stomach as if a lift had plunged unexpectedly. It wasn't just data, it was deeply, terrifyingly personal. Her eyes scanned the jargon-laden text, bits and pieces coalescing into a horrifying mosaic. Neuro, attenuation, emotional decoupling, memory, recalibration. She read, her voice growing fainter with each word. A hot flush crept up her neck, and she clenched her fists under the table until her knuckles were white. This was about engineering. Her mind flashed to the ubiquitous serenity of the Concord citizens, the unlined faces, the placid expressions, the utter lack of overt conflict. She'd always seen it as a triumph of society, a testament to shared values. Now, a chilling explanation bloomed in her mind. "They're not treating suffering," Elara whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "They're removing the capacity for it." Jax nodded, his gaze fixed on the screen, his lips a thin, grim line. Not just suffering. Joy, too, if it's too intense. Anger, passion, grief. Everything that makes us. Us. A memory flickered at the edge of Elara's consciousness. Something about a childhood pet, a boundless, unrestrained delight. Then, a sudden blankness, like a small, smooth stone had been dropped into the river of her thoughts, erasing the ripple. She blinked, shaking her head slightly, trying to dislodge the fleeting confusion. What was that about? It was gone now, just a vague echo of something forgotten. Jack scrolled further. A new set of data emerging. A face filled the screen, benevolent and familiar. Dr. Eris Thorne, the esteemed neuroarchitect, the visionary behind the Concord's era of collective peace, smiled back at them from an archived public address. His eyes, usually conveying profound wisdom and calm, now seemed to hold a chilling, calculating depth. "Thorne," Elara breathed, a bitter taste in her mouth. The files linked directly to Thorne's personal research, a staggering repository of ambition and cold, scientific rationale. It laid bare his manifesto. Humanity's greatest flaw was its emotional volatility, its capacity for self-destruction through feeling. His solution? To gently, imperceptibly, rewrite the brain's fundamental code, not with crude surgery, but with a pervasive, subtle neural frequency disseminated through the very air, the very water. A constant, gentle hum shaping consciousness. Elara felt a wave of nausea. She had admired Thorne like everyone else. His portrait hung in every public square, a symbol of enlightenment. To think that he was the architect of this insidious quietus. She remembered a brief moment of anxiety she'd felt last week about a looming work deadline. It had been there, a tight knot in her chest, then, simply, faded. Not through any conscious effort, just a gentle internal smoothing. She'd attributed it to the Concord's natural calming effect, the sense of collective well-being. Now, the truth felt like a hammer blow. Her hands trembled. "It's not just a project," Jack said, his voice dropping to a dangerous level. "It's a timeline, a final phase." Pointed to a blinking counter on the screen, a series of digits ticking down with horrifying precision. Synaptic convergence. 23 minutes until activation. Elara's blood ran cold. Synaptic convergence. The term reverberated with a finality that made her limbs feel heavy. "What does that mean?" she managed, her voice barely audible. "It means irreversible," Jax explained, his jaw tight. "A final wide-spectrum neural pulse. A permanent resetting. The last vestiges of true, unengineered human consciousness. Gone." A sharp, piercing headache suddenly flared behind Alara's eyes, a metallic tang on her tongue. She pressed her temples, trying to steady herself. A name, a face, something vital, tried to surface in her mind, then just as quickly sank back into the murky depths. Her brother? Her mother? A friend she used to share coffee with every Saturday morning, back when she still drank real coffee. The memory was a ghost, a scent of fresh pastries and a laugh that felt important, but the specifics were just gone. She gripped Jax's arm, her fingers digging into the tough fabric of his sleeve. "We have to stop him." Jax looked at her, his dark eyes grim but resolute. "The synaptic core. It's the only place. He'll be there, preparing for the convergence." Close his data slate, the light vanishing and plunging them back into near total darkness, save for the faint emergency lights overhead. It's through the main server conduits, straight into the central data complex, then up through the access shafts. The journey was a frantic blur, flashing red alarms, hurried commands from Jax, and the sickening lurch of her own fading memories. They crawled through narrow maintenance tunnels, the air growing colder, drier, filled with the sterile scent of ozone and disinfectant. The hum of servers grew into a deafening roar, a symphony of silenced thoughts. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, each beat a frantic drum call against the encroaching fog in her mind. They bypassed laser grids, Jax's fingers flying across control panels with an almost impossible speed, his face etched with concentration. Each success was met with a surge of adrenaline, quickly followed by a new obstacle. Automated drones, designed to detect unauthorized access, whirred past them, their optical sensors sweeping the narrow corridors. They ducked into shadows, their breathing ragged, their bodies pressed against cold metal bulkheads. "Almost there," Jax grunted, pulling himself through a ventilation shaft, his movements economical and swift. Alara followed, the metallic taste of fear sharp on her tongue. Her thoughts were like flickering streetlights, some shining brightly, others dimming, or simply refusing to illuminate. She tried to remember what Jax had said about the core's security protocols, the specific sequence he'd told her to watch for. It was there, just out of reach, a word hovering on the tip of her mental tongue, then dissolving into meaningless static. A wave of sheer terror washed over her. This wasn't just about Thorne's plan for everyone else. It was happening to her right now. The world shifted subtly around her, a sense of unreality starting to creep in. She focused on Jax's broad back, the determined set of his shoulders, trying to ground herself in the tangible. They burst out into a vast cavernous space, a cathedral of chrome and pulsating light. The synaptic core. It rose before them, a monstrous, elegant structure, its surface a lattice of crystalline conduits that glowed with an internal, ethereal blue light. It felt alive, humming, with an almost divine power. At its base, surrounded by a complex array of control panels and energy relays, stood Dr. Eris Thorne. He wasn't alone. A squad of Concord enforcers, their faces impassive behind polished visors, stood guard. Thorne looked up, his movement slow, deliberate, as if he had all the time in the world. He wasn't surprised to see them. A faint, almost imperceptible smile played on his lips. "Alara, Jax." His voice, amplified slightly by the acoustics of the chamber, was calm, resonant, utterly devoid of malice. It was the voice of a man enacting a necessary, noble deed. "You're too late." His hand hovered over a large, glowing red console. On the main screen behind him, the timer for synaptic convergence flashed. 3 minutes. Alara felt a scream rising in her throat, raw and desperate. She lunged forward, her body acting purely on instinct, a sudden burst of primal rage overriding the creeping placidness. A memory, sharp and clear for just a fraction of a second, flashed into her mind. Her own anger, years ago, at a petty injustice, burning bright and real. It was her. She clung to that feeling, that fleeting, precious fragment of her own untainted self. But then, it too began to fade, a wisp of smoke caught in a strong breeze. The enforcers moved, their movements swift and practiced, their energy rifles locking onto Alara and Jax. The blue light of the synaptic core pulsed faster, brighter, mirroring the frantic beat of Alara's heart. Her mind, her very essence, was dissolving around her, piece by agonizing piece. She tasted iron, fear, and a terrifying, profound emptiness. The timer clicked down. 2 minutes, 50 seconds. This was it. The beginning of the end, or perhaps the end of the beginning. The air within the synaptic core thrummed with a low, insistent hum, a vibration that resonated deep in Alara's bones, a sound akin to the collective sigh of a million dreaming minds. Above them, the core itself pulsed, a towering kaleidoscope of intertwined conduits and crystalline matrices, each flicker of light a calculated neural pathway being woven into the grand tapestry of the cognitive convergence. It was beautiful, in a terrifying, sterile way. Thorn stood before the central console, his back to Alara, his silhouette etched against the shimmering light of the core. His posture was one of serene, almost religious devotion. He was merely a steward, he often said, guiding humanity to its true, placid potential. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, forgotten rhythm, in a world that had sought to smooth out all such chaotic cadences. Her palms were slick with a cold sweat that felt alien, an emotion she hadn't consciously registered in years until now. "It's almost complete, Alara." Thorn's voice was soft, devoid of the usual clinical detachment. It carried a strange paternal warmth, as if he were explaining a complex but benevolent operation to a child. The last residual eddies of distress, the final pockets of what you once called individuality, are being gently diffused. He finally turned, his gaze meeting hers, calm and unnervingly clear. There was no anger, no accusation in his eyes, only a profound, unwavering conviction. A wave of nausea churned in Alara's stomach. Individuality. It sounded like a disease now, a flaw to be eradicated for the greater good of universal tranquility. But as Thorn spoke, a memory, sharp and unbidden, flashed through her mind. Her mother's fierce, joyous laughter, ringing through a sun-dappled kitchen, the smell of burnt toast, a tiny scar above her own left eyebrow from a childhood tumble. These were not fragments of distress. These were fragments of her. "You're erasing them," Alara managed, her voice a raw whisper, throat tight. Each word felt like an effort, a struggle against the very peace Thorn offered. Thorn tilted his head slightly, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. We are refining them, transmuting the burdensome dross into pure, unblemished contentment. Imagine, Alara, a world without regret, without sorrow, without the nagging doubt that gnaws at the soul. He spread his hands, encompassing the humming core, the entire vast network. We are almost there. Alara's eyes flickered to the console Thorn had been operating. It was a nexus of delicate controls, each glowing with an arcane precision. Her gaze fixated on a series of energy conduits, thick as a man's forearm, pulsing with contained light. They fed into the main processing unit, the very heart of the convergence. Disabling them cleanly was impossible. Thorn had designed the fail-safes himself. But disrupting them, overloading them, that was another matter. She remembered the schematics she'd painstakingly unearthed, the hidden vulnerabilities, the design flaw Thorn himself had once dismissed as a necessary imperfection for rapid scaling. It wasn't a flaw. It was an entry point. It would require a direct physical intervention, a jolt of energy, precisely where it shouldn't be. You're not giving them peace, Thorn, Alara said, her voice growing stronger, a tremor running through it. Yes, but also a steel she hadn't known she possessed. You're taking away their right to earn it. A faint frown creased Thorn's brow, the first hint of disturbance in his placid demeanor. Alara, you sound distressed. Let me recalibrate your neural inhibitors. You're exhibiting anomalous emotional spikes. He began to move towards a smaller diagnostic panel, his focus momentarily shifting from the core. This was her only chance. Alara didn't hesitate. Adrenaline surged through her veins, a jolt so potent it felt like a physical awakening. She bypassed Thorn, a sudden blur of motion, her hand grabbing a heavy metallic wrench from a maintenance cart she'd strategically placed earlier. It felt solid, real, cold against her skin. With a desperate heave, she swung it, not at Thorn, but at the exposed junction point of the primary energy conduits, the very imperfection he'd overlooked. A sharp, deafening crack rent the air, followed by a shower of brilliant white sparks. The air instantly filled with the acrid scent of ozone and burnt wiring. The rhythmic hum of the synaptic core stuttered, then screeched, an agonizing electronic wail that made Alara's teeth ache. Lights across the core dimmed, then flared erratically, casting grotesque, dancing shadows across the control room. Thorn spun around, his face etched with a rare, furious disbelief. "What have you done?" he roared, his voice losing its calm veneer, a jagged edge of pure, unadulterated rage replacing it. "I gave them a chance," Alara gasped, her arm throbbing from the impact, her chest heaving. The wrench clattered to the floor, forgotten. The synaptic core, instead of shutting down, began to convulse. It wasn't a complete shutdown, as she'd hoped, but a violent, systemic seizure. The cognitive convergence meant to usher in an era of final, perfect peace was instead fragmenting, shattering into a million pieces. Waves of distorted energy pulsed outward, not as a soothing balm, but as raw, untamed force. Outside the core, across the city, the world began to unravel. People in plazas, mid-conversation, stumbled. A woman holding a shopping basket let out a sudden, keening sob, clutching her chest, a memory of a lost child rushing back with agonizing clarity. A man paused, mid-stride, his eyes widening in remembered terror from a childhood accident. A group of teenagers, placidly observing a public art display, erupted into spontaneous, riotous laughter, their faces contorted with an unbridled joy they hadn't felt in years. On the city's vast transport networks, commuters jolted, their eyes suddenly reflecting a kaleidoscope of emotions: fear, anger, overwhelming sadness, incandescent love. Traffic lights flickered, not just from the power fluctuations, but from the sudden, jarring shifts in driver attention. Horns blared. The orderly hum of the city, carefully cultivated for decades by the Concorde, dissolved into a cacophony of human experience, raw and unfiltered. Screams pierced the air, not just of terror, but of confusion, of bewildered awakening. A man collapsed to his knees, clutching his head, overwhelmed by a flood of suppressed grief. Another, standing beside him, began to sing a forgotten lullaby, tears streaming down his face. The illusion of peace, the Concorde's carefully constructed masterpiece of collective serenity, shattered like brittle glass. It wasn't a gentle reawakening. It was a brutal, beautiful rebirth. In the synaptic core, Thorn lunged at Elara, his controlled fury giving way to a primal instinct. "You've undone everything," he yelled, his hands closing around her upper arms, shaking her. His eyes, usually so composed, now burned with a desperate, almost manic light. But for the first time in as long as she could remember, Elara felt light. The immense, oppressive weight she hadn't even realized she carried, the subtle hum of her own neural inhibitors, the quiet erosion of her spirit. It was gone. The raw fear of Thorn, the pain in her arm, even the searing guilt over the chaos she'd unleashed. They were hers. They were hers. They were real. And paradoxically, they brought a profound sense of liberation. She met Thorn's enraged gaze, a defiant glint in her eyes. "No," she said, her voice clear, steady, no longer a whisper. "I've given them back their everything." She twisted free of his grasp, a strength she hadn't known she possessed rippling through her. The fight wasn't over. Not with Thorn, not with the Concorde, but the immediate battle for humanity's mind had just taken a chaotic, irreversible turn. The aftermath was a storm. Across the vast megapolis, the re-emerging emotions and memories hit like tidal waves, sweeping away years of placid manufactured content. The streets were filled with people weeping, laughing, embracing strangers, or arguing with an intensity long forgotten. News feeds, previously broadcasting only calming reports and Concorde directives, flickered with raw footage, bewildered faces, outbursts of joy, fits of despair. It was a beautiful, terrible mess. In the quiet aftermath of the synaptic core, as alarms wailed and Concorde security forces converged, Elara found herself outside, breathing air that tasted different, sharper. The sky above, once a uniform gray, seemed to hold a greater depth of color. She was a fugitive now, her face undoubtedly plastered on every security screen. But she was free, truly free. The gnawing anxiety about her future, the ache of past regrets, they were there, yes, but they were her anxiety, her regrets, not the carefully calibrated absence of them. She felt the full weight of her actions, the sheer magnitude of the turmoil she had unleashed upon millions. It was overwhelming, terrifying. But within that terror lay an exhilarating spark of purpose. She had opened Pandora's box, yes, but she had also returned the possibility of hope, of growth, of genuine self-discovery. Elara knew the Concorde wouldn't give up easily. Thorn, once he recovered from the shock, would undoubtedly try to re-establish control, to fix what she had broken. But he would be fighting against something far more powerful than technology now. The inherent, messy, beautiful truth of human consciousness. Her immediate future was uncertain, perilous even. But the path ahead, though fraught with danger, was clear. She saw the dazed, confused faces in the streets, the raw pain and joy flickering in their eyes. They needed guidance, not control. They needed someone to help them navigate this tempest of rediscovered minds, to understand that pain was not merely suffering, but a prerequisite for empathy, and that joy, truly felt, was worth every accompanying sorrow. The true explanation of the human brain, Elara realized, wasn't to be found in Thorne's elegant algorithms or the Concord's serene pronouncements. It was in the chaotic symphony of a city reawakening, in the individual struggles and triumphs now unfolding across every street, every home. It was an ongoing, messy journey of authentic self-discovery, and Elara, finally unburdened, finally free, was ready to embark upon it, one chaotic, glorious step at a time. The real work, the true understanding, had only just begun.